Title: We played Ouija at midnight, something answered. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. The story begins in a world where curiosity pulls people into shadows they don't understand. Some stories cling to the mind long after they're told. This one lingers like a cold breath behind the ear. If you're listening now, prepare yourself, because what happened that night never truly ended. And if you're brave enough to stay until the end, you might find yourself wanting to hear more, though you may regret it. Trust me. It began as a dare passed between restless teenagers who believed the world was solid, predictable, and safely mapped. They imagined the unknown as something distant, something belonging to stories and superstition. None of them had ever considered that the unknown might wait quietly, watching, hoping for someone foolish enough to call it closer. When they gathered in the abandoned farmhouse on the edge of the forest, they carried nothing but nervous laughter and borrowed bravado. The structure had once belonged to a reclusive man whose disappearance had never been fully explained. Now, the place sagged beneath the weight of time. The porch leaned. The windows stared like hollow eyes. And although the group made jokes to mask their unease, the building greeted them with a silence that felt strange and expectant. The group believed the setting was perfect for a midnight experiment. They had heard stories about people playing with forces they didn't understand, but those stories had become entertainment for them, not warnings. They lit candles in the center of the living room, arranging them in a loose circle as if the fragile flames offered protection. The air grew uncomfortably still, yet none of them noticed how unnatural the quiet had become. They placed the Ouija board on a cracked coffee table, its surface worn and brittle, marked by stains from years of neglect. The shadows around the edges of the room thickened, clinging to the peeling wallpaper. Even the dust in the air felt suspended, as though the house held its breath and waited. As the hour approached midnight, the farmhouse seemed to settle into itself, creaking less, listening more. A tension formed in the room, thin and stretched, tightening the longer they waited. Though they blamed the cold, each of them felt a faint tremor of dread creeping up their spine. When the clock on someone's phone flipped to 12, they placed their fingers on the planchette and waited. They expected nothing. Instead, the board felt faintly warm beneath their touch, as though someone had breathed across it from a place they could not see. At first, there was no movement. Their nervous laughter echoed too loudly in the small space. One of them whispered a question into the stale air, asking if anyone was present. Silence followed, but the kind of silence that felt busy, full, as if something unseen had taken an interest. Then the planchette shivered. No one admitted to pushing it, though each of them suspected the others were playing a trick. It slid slowly toward the word yes, dragging their fingertips along with surprising heaviness. A ripple of unease passed among them, and they asked another question. The planchette answered again, this time faster, as though eager. It spelled out a name none of them recognized, a name that seemed sticky and foreign in their minds. When they repeated it aloud, the candles flickered violently, their flames bending sideways as though blown by a breath that had no source. Shadows deepened in the corners of the room, stretching upward like tall figures stepping closer. The questions continued, fueled now by a mixture of fear and fascination. The responses became erratic, letters forming sentences that made little sense, as though whatever they had contacted struggled to communicate through a thin veil. Words emerged about the house, about the man who had lived there, about something that had come for him in the middle of the night. The presence they had summoned implied that he had not left the house willingly. Something had taken him, something that crawled up from the deep spaces beneath the floorboards, something that found him when no one else was awake. A low groan resonated through the farmhouse, soft but unmistakable. The group froze, eyes darting toward the staircase that vanished into the upper floor. Dust drifted down from the ceiling, shaken loose by a tremor none of them felt. They whispered to each other, voices trembling, asking if they should stop. But the planchette answered their uncertainty by pulling sharply across the board, spelling out stay. The force behind it felt stronger than before, as if a new hand had joined theirs, invisible and determined. Fear seeped into their bones, yet none of them removed their hands. Something significant had shifted in the room, and they sensed that breaking contact might anger whatever hovered near them. A faint tapping sound came from beneath the floor, rhythmic and deliberate, as though someone below was drumming their fingers against the underside of the boards. The pattern grew louder, faster, more impatient. The room's temperature dropped, breath turning to mist in the candlelight. They asked what the tapping was. The planchette jerked violently, scraping across the board with a sound like a dull scream. It spelled out hungry. The word lodged itself in their minds like a thorn. One of them tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow, quickly swallowed by the heavy air. The candles dimmed until they barely glowed, forcing the group into a circle of weak, wavering light. A sudden crack rang out from the far corner of the room, drawing their attention to a section of floorboards that had begun to rise, pushed upward from below. Dust puffed into the air as the boards bulged, trembling as though something clawed at them from the darkness underneath. Panic surged through the group. They shouted that they needed to stop, to end whatever they had begun, but the planchette pinned their fingers down with unnatural force. Their muscles strained as they tried to lift their hands, yet the invisible weight held firm. The bulging floorboards finally split, leaving a jagged crack wide enough to release a thick, stagnant odor that rolled into the room like a breath from a long-sealed tomb. The tapping stopped abruptly. A new sound replaced it, a slow dragging, as though something heavy shifted in the darkness below. The candles flickered wildly, almost extinguishing, and the group huddled closer together, trembling uncontrollably, unable to understand what waited beneath them. They asked one final question, desperation forcing the words out, "What do you want?" The planchette moved with sudden speed, faster than any of them could follow, letters blurring beneath their fingertips. When it stopped, the message was simple and horrifying. It wanted them. The farmhouse groaned, the walls bending inward as if the house itself exhaled in anticipation. The crack in the floor widened, and something cold brushed against the ankle of the closest person. They finally found the strength to rip their hands away from the board. The candles blew out instantly, plunging the room into darkness so complete it felt suffocating. They scrambled toward the door, tripping over broken furniture and each other, guided only by their frantic breathing and the faint glow of moonlight leaking through shattered windows. Behind them, something moved with slow intent, dragging itself across the floor, following them. They burst out of the farmhouse and ran through the field, not daring to look back. The night air felt harsh and alive, pushing them forward with every step. It was only when they reached the safety of the road that they stopped, gasping, trembling, and staring at the silent house. The darkness behind its windows seemed thicker than night, as though something inside watched them leave, waiting for another chance to be called again. None of them spoke on the way home. None of them slept. The experience clung to them, a weight they couldn't shake. And though they abandoned the Ouija board in the farmhouse, they all shared the same sinking realization: what had answered them had not finished with them. It had their names. It had their fear. And it was waiting. In the days that followed, each of them sensed subtle disturbances in their homes, knocks at hours, shadows that hovered too long, and a feeling that someone stood just out of sight. They understood the truth they had hoped to avoid: once something is invited, it does not let go. In the days following the farmhouse incident, the group tried to return to normal life, each person grasping for routines that once felt unshakable. Yet normalcy dissolved quickly, replaced by a creeping awareness that the presence they had encountered had not stayed behind. It followed silently, slipping through cracks of their lives with the persistence of a shadow cast by something that had no physical form. Each night brought a sense of being watched, not by human eyes, but by an intelligence that understood fear intimately. The first signs were subtle, almost dismissible. Lights flickering in rooms they had just exited, objects shifting an inch or two from where they were placed, cold drafts curling through narrow hallways despite closed windows. But subtlety soon gave way to bolder manifestations. One member of the group found long, deliberate scratches on the inside of their bedroom door, the wood carved by something with unnatural precision. Another woke to discover every photo frame in their house turned face down, as though shielding the subjects from an unseen gaze. None of them dared to speak to each other about what was happening. A silent agreement formed among them, born out of shame and terror, as if acknowledging their shared curse would give it power. The presence grew stronger at night, slipping into the quiet hours when their minds were most vulnerable. It pressed on their chests while they slept, rooting them in paralysis. They sensed its breath, cold and patient, drifting across their faces as they lay frozen. It whispered without sound, its intentions seeping into their thoughts. They dreamed of the farmhouse, of the crack in the floorboards widening, of a shape dragging itself upward from darkness so dense it swallowed the light. The dreams bled into waking life, leaving them uncertain where one ended and the other began. One by one, they began to unravel. Exhaustion carved shadows beneath their eyes. Their movements became jittery, driven by an instinctive vigilance that kept them glancing over their shoulders. They avoided mirrors, afraid of glimpsing something behind them. Their homes, once sanctuaries, turned hostile, as though the walls themselves leaned in to listen. They lived in a state of constant dread, waiting for the moment when the presence would finally reveal the full extent of its hunger. Eventually, the group reunited, drawn together not by friendship but by a desperate need to understand what was happening to them. They chose a neutral place, a clearing in the forest far from the farmhouse, as though distance might lessen the entity's reach. The ground was damp, the trees towering overhead like silent witnesses to their fear. Each of them revealed the escalating disturbances they had experienced. As they spoke, an unspoken truth solidified between them: the presence had marked them, and it had no intention of leaving. They debated whether to return to the farmhouse, hoping to undo what had been done, but the thought of entering that decaying structure again filled them with deep, instinctive revulsion. Yet doing nothing felt just as dangerous. They concluded that avoiding the entity was impossible. Whatever they had reached that night had attached itself to them with deliberate purpose. It waited for weakness, for isolation, for the moment when one of them would be easiest to take. It did not wait long. One evening, as darkness seeped across the sky, one of the group members felt an oppressive heaviness settle inside their home. The atmosphere thickened, making every breath a struggle. The temperature plummeted until frost edged the window panes. They sensed the presence entering the room, not walking, but forming, the air bending around it like gravity warping under a massive weight. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the floor, gathering in a single point near the foot of their bed. From that point, something began to emerge. It did not have a defined shape, only a mass of darkness, twisting and pulsing like a living void. Yet within that darkness, the faint outline of fingers appeared, long and jointed in impossible ways. The figure crawled forward with slow determination. As it advanced, the floorboards beneath it groaned despite no physical contact, reacting to a weight that existed beyond the realm of the visible. Terror overwhelmed the victim, freezing them in place. Their pulse thundered in their ears, drowning out rational thought. When the shape reached the side of the bed, it rose to its full height, towering until its head nearly brushed the ceiling. The entity leaned closer, and though it had no face, the victim felt its attention like a blade against their throat. The darkness swallowed all light, leaving only the sensation of being studied by something ancient and hungry. Moments later, the figure disintegrated into a cloud of blackened mist that seeped into the room, curling around the victim before sinking beneath the bed. The silence that followed was heavy, almost mocking. The next morning, the group received no response from the victim. They went to their house, calling out their name, stepping through a doorway that felt colder than the world outside. They found the bedroom in perfect order, the bed neatly made. Only one thing was out of place: a single handprint on the wall, elongated and smudged with a dark residue that seemed to pulse when touched by the light. Their friend was gone. No struggle, no signs of departure, only absence that felt purposeful. The disappearance forced the remaining members to confront the truth. The entity had chosen its first victim, and it was not finished. Panic overwhelmed them. They fled the house, running until their bodies ached, yet no distance offered comfort. The forest whispered around them, wind threading through branches in a pattern that felt deliberate. They sensed the presence moving with them, not behind or ahead, but everywhere, an unseen force that had woven itself into the fabric of their lives. As night fell again, they gathered in the same clearing, trembling and exhausted. They tried to form a plan, but every idea dissolved before it could take shape. Nothing in their experience, or in the stories they had once laughed at, provided guidance for surviving something so intangible. The reality was simple and horrifying: they had opened a door that could not be closed. The entity had crossed through, drawn not by curiosity, but by the promise of fear. As they argued among themselves, the forest fell silent. Not the natural quiet that precedes nightfall, but a void, as though every living creature had paused in recognition of something approaching. A cold wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing the small lantern they had brought. Darkness swallowed them, thick and suffocating. They felt movement around them, swift and deliberate, like multiple hands brushing at the edges of their circle. Then the ground beneath them trembled, and a fissure appeared in the soil, splitting outward in jagged lines. A familiar smell rose from the crack, the same stagnant, ancient odor that had escaped from the farmhouse floor. They recognized it instantly. The forest was no refuge. The entity had simply found another way to reach them. Shadows surged upward from the fissure, twisting into elongated forms that circled the group like predators assessing their prey. The air pulsed with something rhythmic and primal, as though the darkness itself had a heartbeat. The shadows closed in, and the group understood their fate was sealed. They tried to run, but the darkness moved faster, dissolving into tendrils that wrapped around their limbs, pulling them toward the widening fissure. They struggled, their bodies contorting, but the force was unrelenting. As they were dragged downward, they saw the shapes in the darkness shift, revealing glimpses of twisted limbs and hollow faces that seemed to watch them with malicious joy. One by one, they disappeared into the fissure, swallowed by the darkness that stretched endlessly below. The forest returned to stillness, as though nothing had happened. The fissure sealed itself, the soil knitting together seamlessly, leaving no trace of what had unfolded. Only the quiet remained, patient and knowing. The entity had taken what it wanted. And it would wait again. If you made it to the end, remember this: some stories don't stay trapped in the places they began. They linger, they follow, and sometimes they cling to whoever dares to listen. If you felt anything behind you while hearing this, don't look back, just breathe. And if you want more tales that blur the line between real and impossible, subscribe now. There are darker stories waiting for you,